All right, so I had to bust out the AirPods. My other headphones are dead, so hopefully these record well. I don't know. I guess we'll find out. Um, but yeah, I wanted to do a uh, another response video. The last one did really, really well, um, and this is in reference to an older video done by Pints with Aquinas. I love to watch um, probably some better materialed YouTube channels that are theologically focused, and even if that means Christian or some other religious reference, I enjoy watching that. And I think I've remarked before, if you follow me on social media, you know, I have like this deep seated love for cringy, like evangelical, like radio, whatever it is. I just love listening to it because it's just so dumb. Uh, but that's not what this is. So, like, just like with responding to um, Marlon in my previous video, you know, he does a debate channel, The Gospel Truth. Pints with Aquinas is a very popular YouTube channel that um, has some pretty well known individuals on there to debate or to dialogue, discuss. And of course, you know, I'm a theology nerd myself, even though I don't find myself within the same religious substrate, you know, as Pints of Aquinas. I highly respect Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, and I really like Thomas Aquinas. I mean, obviously, Thomas Aquinas made good use of Aristotle, and you know me, I like Plato and Aristotle. Maybe secondarily to the Stoics. The Stoics, I think, are a little better, but that's just me. But I wanted to respond to a video that he did on Aquinas's arguments against polytheism. The way I stumbled into this was actually because I was looking into sort of core theological arguments from Christians against polytheism. And of course, Thomas Aquinas is one of the first dudes you're going to look at because he's got arguments against everything. And then I stumbled into Pints with Aquinas because he does a sort of summary video of it. And I took decent notes of it. I'll try to reference them as I can. So if you see me look down, that's what I'm doing. But I tried to write down some of the direct things Aquinas says about it so that we can engage with it. But I think that what you'll find as we go along, Aquinas is dated, you know, so I think you have to kind of give a bit of charity to these older arguments the same way we would if we were to look at ancient philosophers, and recognize that, you know, they're not engaging in philosophy, say, the same way we do now. That's not to say that these arguments aren't relevant. Certainly they are. But with that relevancy, you'll notice also many things that I've already responded to in part or in whole in the videos I've already made, right? Fundamental, and I think this is important as we move along, fundamental to Aquinas's perspective on this is this notion of divine simplicity. So if you don't know what divine simplicity is, and I'm definitely not the one to explain it in the most articulate way, and I'll talk about divine simplicity a little bit as we move along. You probably would want to do a little digging into divine simplicity. I'm not saying for the important parts of this video that you can't be a polytheist and hold to some form of divine simplicity. Certainly, I think that there might be some coherency there. What I'm going to say, and I guess I'll just outright say it now, I don't think that divine simplicity is just true at all. I think that divine simplicity is a bit of a mental abstraction, and it's based mostly in Anselm's perspective on what God is, right? And maybe that's a good place to start. So the host of the show essentially focuses in on this first argument principle from Aquinas, and he begins by basically saying, and I enjoy the way he does it, he tries to make it very simple, and I hope that I can do a little bit of that here. It really boils down to, what are we talking about when we say God or gods, right? So when you ask a Christian now, at least with any intellectual rigor, what they mean by God, usually they're tapping into some tradition flowing from Saint Anselm, right? Which, if you've watched my channel before, I'm pretty critical of. I think that this whole concept of a maximally great being isn't bad necessarily, at least not in theory, but the way that it's oftentimes used becomes radically arbitrary. When we start talking about like what are maximally great making properties, sometimes those might be prima facie, but more times than not, I think we're just electing them as we feel suited to do so. I think that there's also, and again, we can probably talk about this more as the video goes along. I don't want to keep it too long, but this whole notion of God is perfect. And so we keep loading up baggage on perfection as this sort of abstract term. We've never seen perfection, but we know it's out there. And God is just that thing, right? Whereas I would probably say that perfect is almost a useless term. It doesn't really mean anything. And I think as we dig deeper into this, what we'll find is that, like the philosophers of old, Aquinas is talking about something radically different, I think, than the God of the Bible. And I think that Christians who engage in philosophy in this type of way are also talking about a God radically different than the God of the Bible. Again, my videos, detailed and gratuitous detail. But let's just try to walk through this first argument that Aquinas offers. And I've kind of written down like a summary, short summary, so it won't be exact word for word, but it'll kind of give you an idea. So he says that from his simplicity, I'm talking about God here, for it is manifest that the reason why any singular thing is this particular thing is because it cannot be communicated to many. Since that whereby Socrates is a man and can be communicated to many, whereas what makes him this particular man is only communicable to one. Okay? So that's pretty simple. He's simply using the dogma of divine simplicity, and he's saying, look, for God to be God, he has to be God, right? Now, again, this may sound kind of dumb, right? But this is where that charity comes in for these older arguments. In Aquinas' mind, going all the way back to Anselm, you know, for God to be this particular type of thing, well, there can be no other, right? Because God is perfect, right? And he's going to get into that into a second argument. But let's say a couple of things, a couple of things about this, just by way of critique immediately. So I feel like he kind of undoes himself almost outright when he uses the example of Socrates. So the polytheist could just respond in kind, right? So I think that what we're having here is just, well, for God to be God. And it's like, well, what, again, was meant by God, by you, I mean, by Aquinas, could be radically different than, say, what the polytheist is meaning by God. So God here may be just a general noun, a descriptor, or a category, right? And I understand for, say, those who hold to Aquinas' view, God is like being qua being. He can't be singled out as a being. Numerical value just doesn't have any implication on God, which again, I think is just radically strange. You know, this just the whole way of talking about it is radically strange. Um, but in the same way, he's compared it to Socrates, right? Of course, Socrates is whatever we want to talk about is those particulars that make Socrates Socrates. Socrates still has the nature of a man. He's a man by nature, a human by nature. In the same way, if one believed in a variety of gods like I do, well, yeah, they share in a common divine nature, but what makes Inanna Inanna are those particulars unique to Inanna. And what makes Enki Enki are those particulars to Enki. And likewise to Marduk and An, Enlil, and the same, right? So, I mean, this is not too knocked down of an argument. This is one of those, again, charity moving forward. I think that it probably has a lot more weight for those who believe in divine simplicity than, say, those who hold what I would probably consider a more general or traditional view of God. And by that I mean the God that's portrayed by the Bible, which is, I would probably argue, not exactly the God we get in divine simplicity. The God of divine simplicity, I don't want to draw too many comparisons, but yeah, you know what? I'll leave those comparisons aside. I feel like that'll just get me into a wormhole. That's not what this video is about. Um, but then he goes on to say, so what makes him to be this particular man, as there cannot be many Socrateses, so there cannot be, in that way, many men. Now this belongs to God alone, for God himself is his own nature. Again, this is that divine simplicity bit, which I would just say outright, we have no reason to accept that, right? Maybe I could do an independent video on divine simplicity, but what I would say just outright, especially for the majority of the viewers I probably have, if you're a polytheist, well, the divine simplicity is going to sound really stupid. If you're just a general Christian watching this, look into divine simplicity. It's a very intellectually rigorous school of thought in Christianity. But what you'll find is that it looks nothing like the God of the Bible. It just doesn't. It looks like a very um, souped up version of the God of the philosophers, which Christians love to bastardize, but it looks nothing like the God of the Bible. And so it's probably not going to feel very close to, it's probably going to feel very foreign. And I guess for those few who are Roman Catholic who are watching this, you're probably just going to see this and say, well, I believe in divine simplicity. And so to each their own, right? But I don't. I think divine simplicity is just a big old bag of garbage. Um, and so essentially he says it's just impossible for polytheism to be true. But I think that you can already see now from this very first argument, that's just not the case. As we've already demonstrated, there's just an easy solution to that, even apart from divine simplicity. The second argument goes as follows, and I'm just cutting in the middle of that argument now to make it simpler. This is proved by the infinity of his perfections. His, again, being God, sort of tacking onto that first argument, that God is perfect. He has an infinite amount of perfection, whatever that might mean. For it has been shown that God comprehends in himself the whole perfection of being. All right, so if you're a Christian and you hear that, I think a part of you is like, absolutely, amen. And then you read the Bible and you're like, where in God's name is he getting this? Right? Like, if you just read the Old Testament, again, this is because as Christianity develops, this is medieval writing. It's going to be influenced by a variety of different things, right? And so if you read just the Old Testament, you're like, well, he's not talking about Yahweh. But for Aquinas, when he talks about God, he really means like this maximally, this Ansomanian, maximally great being. Uh, and if many gods existed, they would necessarily differ. Yeah, that's true. Something would belong to one which didn't belong to another, and if this were a privation of one of them, it would not be absolutely perfect. So it is impossible for many gods to exist. So what I would simply say is that it doesn't necessarily follow at all. One simply would just have to say that the gods are not perfect, which I've said many, many times, right? I actually don't think the gods are perfect. I think the term perfect doesn't even have much meaning, right? The way we use it here, I mean, we could keep jabbing back. And I think that the moment you start reading the Christian scriptures, you find that, well, no, that's not Yahweh at all. He's not perfect. He fails all the time. He makes mistakes. He doesn't know things. He does things he repents of. I mean, like literally, you can anthropomorphize anything you want in the Bible, but at the end of the day, if you read the Bible for its ancient Near Eastern context, no one thought this about Yahweh. And the details are going to get more nitty gritty as we go along, at least as far as that narrative is concerned. But what I would say is that Aquinas is right if you buy into the assumption that the gods are perfect. Again, whatever that means, right? But what I've said before is that I don't think the polytheist is bound up in that language. Instead, I think the polytheist could simply respond back that I don't think the gods are perfect. I don't even know what that term would necessarily mean or why that's even relevant. What I would say is that the gods are holy and just and good, right? They function appropriately, but I don't know what you'd mean by perfect, right? So each Christian has their own perspective on that. And I think the further you dig deeper into that, the less they probably know about what perfection means either. You can look up definitions of perfection and talk about what it means to be without error, but then that even makes things a little bit more difficult for the Christian whenever you engage with Scripture. So what I would say is just nope. And so I don't see how that would necessarily even follow that polytheism is not true. And the final major one's actually kind of interesting to me. Basically, it's about the unity of the world. And if that sounds familiar, it's because the Stoics talk about it all the time, and they were polytheists. For For all the things that exist are seen to be ordered to each other, since some serve others, but things that are different do not harmonize in the same order, unless they are ordered by one. Now, I'll give you the example a friend of mine did in college whenever I was a diehard monotheist and I was a Christian. So he stumped me once. I remember this. He asked me, um, Colby, does the world look like it's ordered by one harmonious mind or a multiple that may disagree from time to time? And I think anyone who's living on the planet Earth who has studied anything concerning like just basic science, the world doesn't operate that way. Yeah, sure, there is order in chaos and chaos in order. And yes, there's a uniformity to nature. There's all those things there in this existence, right, in the physical world. Um, but in no way would I say that is everything down to the most minute detail perfectly ordered. I mean, I think that this sort of undermines even the Christian worldview that the world itself is full of sin and calamity, right? So I don't think that this at all. But what I found interesting in the video, particularly that I got the majority of these arguments from, I had to look up the arguments particularly to write them down, but with Pints from Aquinas, he talks about sort of the most ironic situation to this particular topic. He says that, it's comparable to when he had a real job, not working on YouTube. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. Obviously, I wish I got paid by YouTube. That's great. And he had to go to these meetings, and they all had to put their heads together and decide what to do. It's hilarious because, I mean, right now a growing trend is guys like Michael Heiser and evangelical and Eastern Orthodox circles talking about this divine council theory in the Old Testament, where there were multiple gods and Yahweh's kind of at the top, and they were all coming to. And this is because this was an ancient Near Eastern motif. It just was the case that the reason why the world appears the way it does, a sort of order mixed in with chaos, was because there were multiple gods who came together. There was a divine sort of council, right? And in Mesopotamia, particular to my own tradition, it's sort of headed off by a particular god. And different times there are different gods that are at the head of that, but the other gods can disagree with them. And I'll give you a great example of this. This is the most hilarious example, right? So this is just Aquinas who sort of piecemeals scripture, and he's mostly using philosophy. So that's why he's got these arguments, and it doesn't sound holistically Christian. Uh, but if you look at the Old Testament, you have to be asking yourself, when the flood happens, why is Yahweh so pissed and then floods the earth? And then right after it, he's repenting of making man, and he's repenting of doing all these deeds, and then flooding the. Why is he upset with himself for doing it right after being super zealous to do it? And I think the obvious answer is because the Old Testament's engaging with earlier traditions in Mesopotamia, which had a variety of different gods reacting to the flood. And I'll give you that example. Enlil decides to flood the earth. And some of the other gods are not so happy about that. Some of them actually like humanity, and they're like, hey, yeah, I'm not really on board with this. And after he floods the earth, there is an example of certain gods weeping, crying, mourning the death of humanity. One of those particular gods, Inanna. Inanna weeps for humanity. She's mourning because humans are dead. She's not going to get any more offerings. She has no more relationship with the humans, right? She loves humanity, right? She's the queen of queens, right? So I mean, it's right there in front of you, right? It's sort of hard to miss, but obviously, like, if you don't engage with ancient Near Eastern literature and you don't read the Bible in its ancient Near Eastern context, I hate to sound like guys like Michael Heiser. I know I have so many friends who are just getting sick of hearing his name, but he's so popular right now, so Christians are just, I mean, they're adding me in mass robes on Facebook because I'm talking about this stuff, and so is Michael Heiser. So I just happen to be on the flip side of this, and I'm a polytheist in the Mesopotamian tradition, and he's a Christian. But, anyways, I think that that at least makes sense of things. So I think that prima facie, looking at the world, yeah, it seems ordered to some degree, and I think that that's because when the gods are involved in particular subsets of life, they have ordering principles. They are ordering principles, right? To kind of reduce it back to Stoic language. Um, but even when we talk about this sort of unity of divinity, right, there might be a unity of divine nature, but that doesn't necessarily mean there can't be a diversity of divine persons, right? There can't be individual gods participating in a singular divine essence, right? I mean, Zeno, Stoic founder, talks about how the cosmos has a divine essence, that the cosmos itself is rational, but that didn't preclude that there weren't multiple gods that participated in that and manifest in different ways, right? So, yeah, I just don't see how that would be a radical problem. So once again, 3 for 3, I don't really think we have a really strong argument here. He does give some little quips at the end, Aquinas, and of course it's hashed out by Pints with Aquinas, but it's essentially that the people of old were so dumb. Literally, that's the way he talks about it. They're just so dumb that they worshipped physical things. They worshipped like planets, stars, and physical objects. And now that's just sort of a type of rhetoric. It's a type of polemic. And what I would just say to that is, when I pray towards physical objects because I'm a physical object. What? Uh, the gods have their own theophanies. If you know some of the, especially within my own tradition, if you want to pray towards a certain celestial body, that was traditional, very common. And in some way, yeah, the god seems to facilitate, or to use a little Lutheran language, the gods are like in and under uh, uh, these certain physical manifestations. But this is sort of across the board, almost every polytheistic tradition. And it's only a little hilarious because if you're engaging with any sort of scholastic, I mean, in the contemporary sense, like scholarly material on the metaphysics of the ancient Near East, the ancient Israelites also thought God was material. They weren't dualists. So Aquinas is going to kind of inherit a tradition that's sort of Platonic and Aristotelian, and the ancient Israelites had no knowledge of that. So Yahweh had a physical, tangible body, and this sort of messes with this entire paradigm Aquinas has here. So it just doesn't work. And I really enjoy this. I really enjoy this analogy that's given by Aquinas and that's discussed in this video. But sort of tacked on to this is that, you know, people of old were just so dumb that they just worshipped physical bodies, which plays into a lot of the stuff I've talked about with Stoicism, how Seneca essentially says that that's all there are, you know, are physical bodies, right? And if it doesn't have some type of tangibility, like a tangible body, how is it causally affecting other tangible bodies? It doesn't make any sense. What do you mean by something immaterial? And again, this totally gets buggy when you kind of compare Aquinas, which is way later, to like the metaphysics of St. Paul, when he's writing and using terms like pneuma, which is Stoic language to describe God's body, which again is a physical substance. So it doesn't work. None of this works. But I wanted to sort of tack on and kind of close out with this last little example he gives of how pagans and polytheists, he gives this metaphor of like they come into a banquet to a king and they basically just begin worshiping anyone with fancy clothes on. That's essentially how he compares this sort of physicalistic, idolistic, pagan, polytheistic notion to worship natural phenomena as manifestations of the deity. Like the planet Venus being Inanna. That's probably one of the best examples I could give. Or some people within my own tradition, bodies of water representing Enki. He basically, like he says, polytheists essentially walk in and exonerate anyone, worship anyone who's wearing fancy clothing, or even the king himself as a deity. And while I think that that's just a radical miscaricature, and obviously it's playing into a larger metaphysical scheme that Aquinas himself is just full bought into, what I would say is at least we have these physical manifestations. To sort of reverse the roles on Aquinas here and to kind of play back an Old Testament story, where is your God? This immaterial, substanceless being. At least we've got fancy people and we have our king in the front. At least we're attending a banquet. Where are you going? Where's yours at? That's what I would say to this, because as Seneca says, again, if there is no tangibility, what are you talking about? It has no substance, then it has no being. It's not a thing. It's no thing. Your God is no thing. This is pretty simple stuff. And so, again, it's a miscaricature, but I feel like it's just one of those landmine examples that actually votes more so in favor of the polytheist than it does for the Christian. The last bit he offers is that this is just the malice of the devil that encourages polytheism and the worship of these natural phenomena. And I think that that's just dumb. He says that ancient people are stupid. I think that Aquinas is just being stupid here because, I mean, think about it. Um, what sounds like a better God? You know, I've talked about this many, many times. The God who tells you to physically mutilate your genitals and then sort of subjugates you and exposes you to oppression over and over again, causes you to lose battles all the time. You know, like just read the Old Testament and tell me whether or not you think Yahweh's doing a great job. Is he really out for the well-being of his people? It's kind of hard to say. Kind of hard to say. You know, what about the gods of Mesopotamia? What about the polytheistic gods of old? How would you say that they're faring with the people that they've chosen to take care of? I think more times than not, what you'll find is that they're doing an excellent job. Um, I've given this example in many videos, but I'll give this example again of the passage from Jeremiah in the Old Testament where the people of Israel were worshiping the Queen of Heaven, Inanna, anybody? And they say they're flourishing. Their children have long lives, they're fruitful, and they have plenty, and there's no warfare. And when they stop worshiping her and they just worship Yahweh, life is total shit. I mean, if we want to talk about the malice of the devil, well, I mean, sounds like Yahweh's your problem, not the gods of polytheism. And then there's this, of course, this whole landmine issue. And this video is going on way too long now. This whole landmine issue that the God Aquinas is describing here sounds nothing like Yahweh to begin with. It just sounds like sort of a very souped up version of the God of the philosophers. It sounds like Aquinas had more of a fixation on Ansem than he did on Yahweh. And just piecemealing Old Testament scriptures isn't really going to help the fact. And so what I would probably argue back is that even if Aquinas' perspective of divine simplicity is true, maybe it's just Yahweh who doesn't exist. Hey man, I enjoy Aquinas. Pints with Aquinas is a really good YouTube channel. Maybe he'll check out mine. Highly doubt it. Way too small for that. But yeah, hope you enjoyed this video, and looking forward to all the crazy comments I get from this.